Greetings, my name is Jim Stewart. I am a project management professional working out of the Boston, Massachusetts area. I've been a project manager for about 20 years. I'm recording this in May of 2012. And I teach both PMP and PM 101 and some risk. And I also consult organizations, and my background is largely was in IT, doing rollouts of new technologies. But for the past 9 years or so, I've been involved in doing some pharmaceutical work as well, going in and helping them create schedules and risk registers. And I do some mentoring from time to time of junior PMs. What I wanted to present today was, I guess the way I can explain it is, I do a lot of project management training, PMP training. I've been doing it for about 10 years. And everybody that comes to my class has misconceptions about it. People that come to my classes, people that I meet at PMI meetings, people I meet who are project managers, they all have the same questions. And so I thought, wouldn't it be nice if I put this all together in one place, put it out there on YouTube, and hopefully put some of those concerns to rest. There may be others that I'm not thinking of, but I try to cover as much information as I possibly could. So listen for about a half an hour or so, and I'll tell you about the considerations that you need to think about as you go forward to become a PMP. Now, as I mentioned, I've been teaching PMP for about 10 years. I mentioned a lot of misinformation, and I want to clear up those misconceptions. Now, disclaimer, I represent no particular vendor. I do mention some, because it's necessary to do that, and there is one that I tend to use. I'll mention that later. Full disclosure compels me to admit that I do provide PMP training. I mentioned that already. But despite that, I've tried to be as objective as I can. So, if you want an instructor, get one. If you want to self-study, I'll give you the pros and cons of that. Now, I'm only one data point. I hope I will clear up some issues, but do your own research. Use me as a starting point if you have no other information. Now, the kind of questions we'll cover, this and more, are, should I get the PMP? Am I better off getting a university degree? How hard is the exam? That's the time-honored question. Do I have to join PMI? Can I self-study, or do I absolutely need an instructor? Is a live in-person class better than a virtual one, which would be on the internet? And once I get my certification, how do I keep it? Do I have to retake the test? I'll answer all of these. Now, the first question, by the way, on those previous questions, I don't know that I can answer them for you, but I can at least give you something to think about. I can't tell you whether to become a PMP or not. I'm not going to sit here and say it's the best thing. It's been great for me. I'm a consultant, and quite frankly, if I didn't have the PMP, I could neither teach nor could I go into organizations. So I'd be doing something else for a living. But that's me. That's my situation. Ask yourself why you want it. Do you think it will make you a better project manager? Well, yes, somewhat. I'll talk about that. Does your boss want you to have it? Well, end of story. I want to work someplace else, your boss or your management. Sometimes it's a competitive thing. I'm teaching an organization now, a big telecommunications company, and all of their people are getting it because their competition has it. So when their competition goes in and says, we have 2,000 PMPs, then my company has to have 2,000 PMPs. There's a competitive advantage. Does it make you more marketable? It will somewhat. And we'll talk about that. And will it allow you to share a common language with your fellow PMs? It will. It will do that. Now, I'm not sure if that's enough incentive to do it, but it's one of the things that you may want to consider. Now, the pros of getting your PMP. You will certainly become more marketable. Now, recent surveys have shown that PMPs earn more both in the U.S. and other parts of the world with that certification. Now, I'll be freely honest here. I have no affiliation whatsoever with PMI, other than being certified by them. So I will freely admit to you that the most recent survey that I saw was written by PMI. Now, if they're honest, nobody's contested it. And the certification that I saw showed that in various parts of the world, everywhere in the world, I could say, the PMPs were making as much as $10,000 or $12,000 more a year, United States dollars, but it transferred over to Europe and whatnot as well. So they were making more. And you can do your own research for surveys. I think that survey is available at PMI. You could call them and ask them about that. They're in Pennsylvania. I don't have the number at hand. And get that survey. And you can do your own research for jobs. Go out there and look for project manager jobs on Monster or Dice. See what comes back. Get your own sense of that for certification. Now, another pro is you'll be able to speak in a language consistent with other PMPs. If you're in an organization and everybody isn't trained to the same level, one person calls something a charter, one calls it a contract, etc., the language can be disorienting. It's nice to go in an organization, for me as a consultant, to see that everybody's been trained and they're all talking more or less about the same thing. Other pros, this speaks to that. If you apply what you learn rather than just learning to pass a test, it will make you a better project manager. Now, I'm not going to say it's going to make you a great project manager. I don't think that there's some dramatic dividing line between PMP and non-PMP, but what it will do, and what it did for me, was it made me more cognizant of things I hadn't been thinking about. So PMI covers 9 what they call knowledge areas. And just for the sake of shorthanding it, if there were things like procurement, I hadn't thought about procurement much. Now, I had been doing it, but I hadn't been thinking about it in totality. Nor had I been thinking much about quality. PMI says these are your job as a project manager. And other students have come back and said, you know what? And this is from feedback directly from students. I'm more cognizant of change control since I got my PMP, and I'm more serious about that. So for every student that writes me and says, I passed, and that's their entire message, I get a couple of other students that write back and say, not only did I get it, but I'm actually applying some of the things I learned. Now, the cons of it. If you're not now a good project manager, getting your PMP may increase your knowledge, but it won't by itself make you a good PM. Now, I may sound like I'm contradicting what I just said, but the point is, let's look, I'll be honest with you. If you're not a good project manager now, and you get your PMP, you'll learn a few things that will broaden your experience as far as contracts, quality, etc. But in and of itself, you won't go back and all of a sudden start running your projects on time and on budget. So you'll learn more. If you're a good project manager, it will make you better. If you're a bad project manager, it will make you a little bit better, but not so much that there's a lightning-like change between pre and post PM. You may need other training. Now, the second bullet says you maybe better go off getting a university level degree. Now, I've taught at the university level, and I'll give you the difference in a nutshell. When we teach PMP, it's usually over 3 days, maybe 4 days. And in that time, we've got to cover a lot of ground, 9 knowledge areas, plus information about how to apply, plus information about the testing environment, plus self-testing. I figure that, take risk for one example. I might have 3 hours, 3.5 hours to teach you risk in the course of that 3 or 4 days. Now, I taught at a university. I taught a 30-hour class on risk. Compare 30 hours to 3 hours. So if you're looking to become a better PM, it might be that you want to get a university level degree before you get PMP. I think I argue later that the best of both worlds would be to have both a university level degree and the PMP. You're certified, you're marketable with a hiring manager, you got this degree, and you go forth and do that. Now, by the way, the PMP will introduce you to certain soft skills such as conflict resolution, psychological theories. It'll make you think about those, but you won't go back the next day and suddenly be a better motivator of people, because I think you've got to be a great motivator of people if you're a project manager. The university level ones, the one that I taught for didn't necessarily have a how to resolve conflict or how to motivate people. It might have had a communications class, which is good. But I think those people skills are either best learned elsewhere outside of project management or somewhat on the job. Now, there are some arguments against the PMP. What do I mean by that? Any day of the week, you can go on LinkedIn or anywhere on the internet and find people arguing against getting the PMP. My philosophy, and all the time they spend arguing, they can get their PMP. But their argument, and we need to entertain it here, some say that for all its difficulty, it's still too easy to get vis-a-vis other certifications. So the CPA has a 14-hour exam over several days. The PMP is 4 hours. So some of the arguments are, this thing isn't rigorous enough. Yeah, I would agree. It could be more rigorous. It's a very hard test. You have to study for quite a while. We'll talk about the amount of time. 4 hours is still difficult. If PMI someday decides to up that, fine. I'm okay with that. But the thing is, if I'm a hiring manager, I don't blame PMI for this. Some people want to blame PMI. This is the hiring manager's not doing the job. I've been a hiring manager. And if two candidates came to me, and the first thing I would do, I would not look at their certification. I would look at their experience. I look at how many years experience, managing what type of project, how many millions of dollars, what level of complexity, whether it was international. If I wanted that, I would build up on that, and I would grill them about specifics about their experience, talk to their references. And now if it came down to two equal candidates, I might say, well, one's got university level, one's got PMP. I might weigh those. I might not take the PMP. I might take the person with a university level degree that has a broader range plus number of years experience. I might train to be a PMP just as icing on the cake. So for me, the problem isn't necessarily PMI or the PMP. It's that sometimes project hiring managers, I'll get me a PMP. I had one guy try to hire me because he said, you're a PMP and you must know Microsoft Project. Well, it happens, I do, but it got nothing to do with the PMP. So there's a lack of understanding out there in the marketplace about what a PMP does or does not know and how you should hire these people. There are certifications in the world that are more rigorous. I'll talk about them later. I don't know much about them, but I'll tell you a little bit that I do know. Now, there are some, one in particular that I'll talk about later that's very rigorous, and you go through a lengthy period of study and test taking, and you're probably a better project manager for it. The problem is when you go to a hiring manager, at least in the United States, he's never heard of it. So now what do? Do you get the certification that's quote-unquote better, or do you get the one that's marketable? This is your dilemma. And the other argument, there are too many PMPs who get certification but cannot run a project well. I won't argue that that's probably true. And it goes back to my statement about hiring managers. You better believe if I'm a hiring manager, I'm going to do the type of screening that I talked about. So too bad if the hiring manager is just screening or not screening correctly. That's not PMI's fault. Now I mentioned this. Should I get a PMP or university degree? I'll briefly go through this because I talked about it already. In the best of all worlds, you get both. Given the fact that you may have to pay for this yourself, the question is whether you try to become marketable or become a better project manager. If more marketable, then clearly PMP is the way to go. If better PM, they would recommend university degree. In fact, in that same PMI study that I alluded to, the difference was a PMP was making $10,000 or $12,000 more a year. A person with a university degree was making like $2,000 more a year, US dollars. So it's a marketplace thing. It's what's recognized. So what you could do, one way possibly to go would be to get your PMP, and you still need 4,500 hours. You're not a junior kid here. Get your PMP, take it seriously, get your certification, learn a few things, then go back to your boss and say, at some point in time I'd like to get a university degree as well to make myself even better project manager. Many places will pay for it. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. So you need to figure that one out. So those are some considerations in going for it, whether to go for it or not. Now, the difficulty of the exam. Let me tell you about the myth and the reality of the difficulty of the exam. I had a prospective candidate come to me who was a Mensa member. That meant he was in the top 2% of intelligence of the entire world, and he asked me if it was too difficult to take. This is the mythology of this thing. Yes, it's very difficult, but it's not impossible. I am no Mensa member. I got one. There are over 400,000 PMPs in the world. They got one. How do they do it? They studied. End of story. You must study hard for a while. I will tell you what that's all about later on, but you must. The test itself is a 4-hour, 200-question, multiple-choice test across 9 knowledge areas, incorporating cost and schedule and procurement, communications, all that. It also tests on soft skills such as conflict resolution, management theories, accounting terms, standard deviation. PMI expects you to be a mile wide, as I say here, and an inch deep in areas such as accounting. They don't want you to be an accountant, just want you to be able to talk to an accountant. And standard deviation, I believe, because it measures levels of confidence and things like this. So they want you to be able to talk the language of these people rather than be these people. Okay. Now, more in the difficulty. You'll be expected to understand and answer questions in the way that PMI thinks. You need training for this. What do I mean by that? I'll give you an example of that. There is a construct you may know or may not know called the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is a visual you take stickies and put up on a board, and it tells you what the work is of the scope of the project. Very quick to learn, fairly lengthy to do, very quick to learn. In the PMI world, the WBS, the work breakdown structure, is only deliverable oriented and there are no activities on it. Okay? In the real world, you can put activities on the WBS. I do it all the time. So when I teach WBS to people that use WBS, so you can only put deliverables on it. Why? Well, I believe that PMI says that a car is defined by the roof and the floor and the windows and the drivetrain and the suspension, not by install door, not by install windshield wipers. So the WBS in the PMI world is nouns, and in the real world might include verbs. You need to learn that and differentiate between it. Now, many of the questions are not rote memorization, but are in fact scenario-based. So for example, going back to the WBS. Now, might there be a question asking you, what is a WBS with 4 answers? Maybe. More likely, it will be something like this. You are the project manager, and you have just done your WBS, and you've signed a contract, and your sponsor wants to meet with you. What do you do next? Many of the questions are, you are the 3 or 4 sentences long. We call this the STEM. You are the project manager. Question, question, question. What do you do next? You are the project manager. Statement, statement, statement. What do you do first? What do you, etc. Like that. So there's a number of those. Now I tell my students, do not be worried about these. If you can memorize your stuff for the exam, you can translate that into scenario questions. And there are also longer types of questions. So network diagramming, which we're definitely not going to go into here, and another concept called earned value. Now the network diagramming involves manual scheduling. You draw on a piece of paper, and you draw and you redraw and you put answers in the computer, and that can take a while. Also earned value, which involves math. Now as soon as I say math, at least one of my students on my calls or my class freaks out. I'm math phobic, I don't like it, and I say 2 things. One is the math is addition, subtraction, and division. So it's simple math. 2, get over it. I have no other way to say that but get over it, because you have to go through it. You can't not do it. So you need to learn the math that's involved with it. And I've had people come back to me and say, hey, you helped me get through the math. You need to overcome that phobia. Once people learn network diagramming and earn value, they can do them. I've never had anybody come back and say, oh, I couldn't do them. And I say, I had 2, I had 10, whatever, but they usually can do them. Now, let's talk about styles of learning. You know, having been through high school and college and secondary school, how you study best, right? I don't need to tell you. You know if you're the right person who likes to cram at the last hour, or spend weeks studying, or study by yourself, or have an instructor. Now, if you've gone through high school and college, you've mostly had an instructor. And so you know that you are used to that. But here's the thing. Can you self-study for the PMP? The answer is yes. It is entirely possible to self-study. Many students have done it and passed the exam over the years. Now, personally, I didn't. Whether I could have or not, I sort of did. Let me qualify that. I went to a class for 2 days, and I took the materials, and then I studied on my own. But that's not really self-study, is it? I was instructed by somebody on what to study. So I consider that to be a class that I went to. I chose not to go for self-study. Bullet number 2, it requires more self-discipline and focus than the instructor-led class. You may need somebody to push you. Look at that sentence. Again, self-discipline. You need self-discipline anyway to study, but if you're not a self-starter and you don't know how to do that, you need to lean towards an instructor-led class, and there are various varieties of that we'll discuss. Now, some people can't do it because they need to get out of the office or from home and get on site. I know many people who just, for that reason, say, look, if I'm in the office, I'll be distracted. If I'm home, I've got my kids, etc. They need to get on site or get away from that. The other reason is they need to have someone guide them through the material. Now, I needed that. I need someone to say, memorize this, this is important, this is not important, here's how you do earned value, here's how you do network diagram. I needed that. Now, the last bullet speaks to something much more mundane. Some people do have the self-discipline to self-study. The problem is when you apply, you must have 35 hours of project management education or you can't apply. Simple as that. Where do you get those 35 hours? If somewhere in your life you've taken 35 hours of education in project management and you can prove it if audited, we'll talk about that later, and the training organization tells you that they're applicable to PMI, you're all set. You can self-study or not as you choose. If you don't have that, then you're going to have to go to a class because that class will give you the 35 hours of education. So some people go for that reason alone. And I would argue that's not a bad thing because they're still getting, if they've picked right, a good class, which leads to instructor-led classes. You need to find a good instructor, period. You know this. You all have had at least one bad instructor who put you to sleep. Now, there's nothing worse because it's an agonizing 3 or 4 days with a boring instructor. I went online recently to view a project management presentation because I was doing some online and I wanted to see what the competition was like, quite frankly. And there was a woman on a presentation who kept reading the bullets with no inflection, no tone, droning through these slides. I turned it off after a minute because I was bored to death. So you need to talk to the companies that you're thinking of hiring, the instructor companies. Now the first question speaks maybe somewhat obliquely to the instructor. What is the pass rate? How many people are passing with this instructor or your company? Now all companies will quote you 95% plus. I've never met a company that says, oh yeah, we're failing 50% of our people. I'm not saying they lie. I'm just saying that everybody's statistics seem to be pretty high. The truth of the matter is we don't always know. When I teach people, they're not required to come back to me and tell me whether they passed or failed. Some of them disappear. It's very hard for me to gather a pass rate, although I get hired for 10 a year, so I'm assuming it's pretty high. Can you talk to the instructor in advance? Now, some people will let you and some won't. I don't see what he has to hide. If you talk to the company and say, I'd like to talk to your instructor, if it's a one-person company or whatever, I'm sure he will or she will. If it's a bigger company, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Failing that, do they have the recordings on YouTube? Listen to those. And as importantly or more importantly, are they prepared to give you a couple of references? And what you want to hear is that they kept you interested, they told you what to study and not to study, their knowledge base seemed pretty thorough, like that. As I say, if you don't feel comfortable with the answers, keep moving. Now, all PMP prep material is based on the PMBOK. What is the PMBOK? The PMBOK is PMI's project management body of knowledge. It's a 300 or 400-page book that is our Bible. You can't escape it. No vendor of any sort, being PMP prep, can base their materials on anything but the PMBOK. So how do they differentiate themselves? Well, a little bit. I've taught from 4 vendors now. And by the way, I helped create a vendor. They're not on Amazon. They're not famous, but they're a boutique vendor. They have a prep book, and I help collect questions and whatnot. How to differentiate themselves is severalfold. One is when they interpret the PMBOK, they usually write a companion book. Now, the PMBOK is a dry, tough read. But I always encourage students to read it anyway for a variety of reasons. But there's always an auxiliary book that every vendor provides that tries to interpret the PMBOK and make it more readable. So they may veer a little bit. Some will say, well, here's a typical earned value question. They may give you 3 or 4. One might give you 1 question. One might go in a little more detail on standard deviation. The other not so much. So it's by degree. But what you're really looking for is the quality of the materials. So the study book that I mentioned is a prep book. It's still from the PMBOK. And it will contain not only a more readable version of the PMBOK, but also typically sample PMP type questions. Now these PMP type questions are written by the vendor. I want you to know something. Vendors can't see the real PMP exam. I can't see the real PMP exam ever again. They can't hire people to go take the PMP exam to write questions. PMI won't allow that, nor would they probably do that. So they're taking their best guess at what the questions look like, and they guess pretty well because people pass all the time. So there will be sample PMP type questions in your workbook, or I should say in your study book. Now there's typically a student workbook. That student workbook is typically comprised of the instructor slides, slide for slide, maybe more or less some other things. And you as a student can write notes as he or she talks. The vendor should give you access to a bank of exam questions, exam PMP type questions, either online on a website or on a CD. I prefer the online because they can update them as need be, whereas the CD gets kind of static and out of date. I would argue you should have at least 600. More the better. If you can get 800, if you can get 1,000, if you can get 1,200, great, but no less than 600. Flashcards. You may take a concept like charter, and they may have charter on the front of the car, flip it over, and it says the definition. These are great for memorization. 400, 500, 300. If they don't have them, you can make your own right out of the PMBOK using index card. Now, they should also have a quick reference guide to key concepts. It might be a 3 or 4 or 5 page laminated guide, and that laminated guide might lay out earned value formulas. A lot of formulas you're going to memorize, by the way. Oh, and by the way, this says, I'm veering here a little bit. When you go take your test, you don't take your test from PMI. You take your test at a center called Prometric. Prometric allows you to bring no study materials in. You can't bring pencils in. You can't bring pens in. You can't bring paper in. You can't bring a calculator in. You can't bring a phone. You can't bring anything that would indicate anything that you could refer to. So you have to memorize formulas, and a good instructor will tell you what formulas to memorize. So you have a quick reference guide to key concepts is handy. They may or may not provide a PMBOK. I don't care if they do or not. If they do, great. If not, you can pick one up at Amazon for 40 bucks. They may provide a guarantee. This is nice to have, and may help you screen different vendors. A guarantee says something like this: if you fail, we'll allow you to enter another public class. Or if you fail, we will pay for the retake of your exam. So either one's a win, right? And lastly is email access to the instructor. I do this all the time. I give everybody my email address. Every student I ever had has my email literally to the end of time, because what do I care? They can email me up till when they take their exam and ask me questions. And if they pass the exam, when they pass, if they have questions afterwards, unless it becomes some big involved thing that involves consulting, I'll answer those too. But the truth of the matter is, it usually ends with the exam. So you have to have email access to them for questions. Now, if you decide to go to an on-site class and you're not going to self-study, what's it like? All right, let's say it's a 3-day class. There are 3-day and 4-day classes, and I'll talk about the 5-day, sort of 5-day one later. They'll begin with a self-assessment test ordinarily. They'll give you a 20 or 40 or 60 question test just to see where you're at, a baseline of a dive into the pool. You probably won't do well because you haven't been trained. It depresses a lot of people, but it's necessary to see where you are. We throw you into the pool to say, you may have been a project manager for 25 years, but for this test, you have a ways to go. So there's that. So after that's out of the way, there's a lot of administrative and talking about the test itself and whatnot in the application. You go through a set of slides geared towards the PMBOK knowledge areas. This is where the bulk of the class is. Going through cost, going through procurement, going through quality. Slides, a lot of interaction, discussion, etc. There should be a lot of regular self-testing and drilling. So you may take tests during the class on the various knowledge areas, hopefully getting better as you go along. Drill, 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 repetition, 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 etc. You will discuss the PMI application, because the PMI application is not fun to fill out. Another one of those myths that's turned into a horror show for people in their minds, because as difficult as it is, again, 400,000 people in the world got through it. We also talk about the Prometric testing environment. And at the end, time permitting, an end of class test to see how you progress. So if there's time at the end, I know I've sometimes administered a test to see. And don't expect a lot of progression. Don't expect you're going to come in and be scoring at 45% on the baseline and 90% at the end of the class. You'll probably kick up a couple of points, but that's all there is to it. Now, what type of on-site classes? I typically teach 3 days. Some people teach 4 days. I'm not sure what is done on the 4th day, quite honestly, but okay. 3 or 4 days. Typical PMP class can be 3 or 4 days long, depending on how long the vendor thinks it needs to impart information. Maybe 4 days is good because there's more drill, but I think it can be conveyed in 3. In these classes, the expectation is that some amount of time will pass between the class and when you take your PMP. So the class ends, you all shake hands and go home and you get your attending class certificate. Now, my expectation as a teacher is that there will be several weeks, and I'll talk about exactly how many, between the time you finish and the time you take your PMP. Study time. All that's happened in the 3 days you've been in class, all that's happened is I've crammed a lot of information in your head. You are not ready to walk out the door in my mind and take the PMP. I have taught you a lot, but you got a lot of studying to do in those average classes. Now, Having said that, there is an alternative typically called a boot camp. In this instance, you study for 4 days and take the PMP on the 5th day. This works quite well for some people. In fact, there's a company called Cheetah Learning, and they've done this successfully for years. Now, for me, I could neither take nor teach this. I couldn't take it because that's just too much information in too short a time. I wouldn't have the level of confidence that I would otherwise need. And I don't think I like to teach either because I would feel very nervous just taking exactly the same material I'm teaching and saying, well, in class 1, I want you to study for 4 weeks, but in this 5-day class, all right, study for 5 days. I'm not crazy about that, but it is out there as an alternative. So those are the on-site classes. Now, should I consider a virtual class? Virtual classes are what they sound like, over the internet, and they're a fine alternative. I personally have been teaching them for about, I think, 5 or 6 years, maybe longer. And he's worked great. Now, there is some argument on the internet. It's not as touchy-feely as the in-person classes. But you know what? We're not doing in a PMP prep. Think of a PM 101. In a PM 101, which I teach as well, I go to customer sites, and we do a work breakdown structure, and we divide up into teams, and they go up on the board, and they put sticky notes on the board. Then we talk about it. They report out. They do flip charts. We do risk registers. This is not that. Yes, that's better for that type of class. This class is just you receiving a fire hose of information that you have to memorize. And the exercises are all done on paper. So there's no reason not to go to virtual. Well, there's one reason, I'll tell you what it is in a minute, but typically you can go virtual. So tools such as WebEx and Adobe Connect 8 allow the instructor to communicate with students by chat, where they type in, by phone, if they dial in, or directly over the computer, voice over IP, which is effectively what I'm doing here when I talk. So we can communicate very effectively. The only thing the instructor loses is body language. So it's nice for me as an instructor to be in a class when I say, does everybody get earned value, and see heads nodding and shaking involuntarily, and I can circle around and talk to that person. I do miss that, but that's the only thing. Students can raise hands to ask questions. There's a little hand in WebEx you click on, and I can see raised hands. Very often, these sessions are recorded. I teach for one customer that records all my sessions. Now, you can't do this live. If you walk in a classroom live, you can't bring a camera. In the virtual sessions, these are recorded, and students can watch them later on to their heart's content. And the students only need a browser. They don't need Adobe Connect 8 or WebEx. Now, I mentioned, I think I'll talk about this later, but I'll bring it up here. What is the one reason you wouldn't want to go to this? Is if you can't go to this. If you are not the type of person that can go to this. Case in point, I've taught some virtual classes, many of them, and people will log in and we'll have 15, 20 people, whatever. I see their names in the participant list, and I'll ask them to introduce themselves, and that's the last time I'll ever hear from them. Their name shows up, but I'm not sure they show up. So, for example, somebody will say, tell me about the WBS, and I'll explain the whole thing. And I'll go on to the next thing, and somebody will raise their hand. I'll say yes, and they'll say, did we discuss the WBS? And I'll say to myself, you walked away. I know you walked away. I won't say that, but I'll say, well, we just discussed it 5 minutes ago. So you know that some people walk away, or their minds wander, or they surf the net, or they play solitaire. If this is you, don't take a virtual class. If you need to focus on being physically in the presence of an instructor to keep yourself motivated, don't do it. For all others, definitely consider it. So I said, what are your options? Self-study, you know the pros and cons, you need discipline, you need the right materials, you need questions, and if you need the 35 contact hours, you can't do it. On-site, great, 3 or 4 days. Boot camp, 4 days. Boot camp, test the 5th day. And again, those 3 versus 4 days. I don't know. I can convey all this information 3 days. I'm not sure. You can talk to them and say, why is yours 4 days? Maybe they have more review. I just don't know. And virtual, I just talked about the pros and cons. There's no right way to answer this. It depends on how you best learn. I don't think you'll be able to audit any of these typically. So you have to figure out the best way that you learn. Okay. How much will this cost? Like so many things in life, it depends. Self-study is clearly cheapest. You're not paying for an instructor. You can typically buy a self-study book. We all know that Rita Mulcahy makes a PMP prep book. If you don't, you should. It's a very good book, and it costs less than $100 USD. But having bought that book, and I do have an older copy of it, you will still need to purchase a question bank. Now, I think Mulcahy provides one, but that's where you can mix and match There's a company called MeasureUp that provides one. I don't know too many separate database banks of questions, but the book itself doesn't feel to me like enough. It's got enough questions in it. It has some questions, but you want more. You have to research that. Now, I've seen prices for the actual class anywhere from $9.95 to several $1,000s. I fall somewhere in between there, right? When I teach, I'm neither at the high nor the low end. And I can't justify why a company would charge $3,000 for a class like this, but some do. And you have to investigate. If you know what you're looking for and do your homework, you know when you're getting a good deal. So weigh out the offering versus the price. Now, don't forget, you're taking a class from a vendor. You're not taking it from PMI, and it's separate from taking the test. Therefore, you have to pay PMI too. You have to pay for whatever it costs you to study in time and in money, and then when you apply with PMI, you have to pay them $555 USD as of May 2012. This covers the test and any per-metric fees, per-metric being the center where you take the test. You don't pay per-metric separately. If you fail, you can retake the test for $275, which, if you have a guarantee from a vendor, they will pay. PMI will allow you to retake the test 3 times in 1 year, and you never have to join PMI anytime in your life, ever. Not for the test, not after the test, not while you're a PMP, nothing. Now, I join every year. I just do. It costs about $129 US dollars to join, maybe another $25 for a local chapter fee. Now, if you join before you take the test, then the test is cheaper. You see what I'm saying? But it's kind of a wash. You pay a certain amount for the joining, and you pay commensurately that amount less for taking the test. So it's dollar for dollar. It's very comparable. Why join PMI in that case? Because you then can get their magazines online and certain discounts for books you buy from them. But if you choose to do that. If not, you don't have to. Now, study time. How did I study? After I took my 2-day class, I studied for 4 to 6 weeks, for 2 hours per night, for 6 nights a week, and I passed. So when I started teaching a year later, I recommended that to see what would happen. I figured I would modify it. I haven't modified this advice in 10 years. I still recommend 4 to 6 weeks for 2 hours per night, at least 6 nights per week. Sorry, but that's the way it is. Treat this like a project. If you're saying, well, I'll start in April, but I got a wedding in May, then don't do it. Do not plan around life events. Plan when you have 4 to 6 weeks at night for 2 hours per night, at least 6 nights per week. And you know what? Turn the TV off when you come home. So I tell my students, come home, kiss your spouse, kiss the kids, eat dinner, 7 o'clock, turn off the TV, open the books for 2 hours, and you can watch TV at 9 o'clock, right? So you got it covered. So it's doable. Even if you're traveling heavily. I've heard of an excuse in the book. People say, well, I was traveling a lot. Oh, well, you were in a hotel all night. Yeah, well, study in your hotel. Study on the airplane. So try to have that time available. So if you're considering, make sure you have this chunk of time. Now, you should be self-scoring at about 85% correct consistently. By consistently, I mean don't take test 1 and score at 85, and test 2 and score at 60, and test 3 at 100 and average them out. I want you self-scoring at about 85% consistently. I'll tell you, I've come up with that, and the industry is around 85%. I'll tell you what the thinking is, even though PMI doesn't give us too much to go on. Now, when you self-test, these banks of questions will have 25 questions at a pop or 50 questions at a pop. Ultimately, you want to work yourself up to 200 question tests. If you were running a marathon, you wouldn't run a 2K and then a 5K and then run the marathon. You would run 2K or whatever it is, a 5K, a half marathon. Eventually, you'd run a full marathon, and then you run the Boston or the New York. But you want to run a marathon before you run a marathon. You want to run some other marathon before you hit the big one. So I want you sitting for as many 200-question tests. You can build up stamina. It's tiring to sit for 200-question tests. So do that. All right, what is the passing score? PMI, in their wisdom, has not published a passing score for at least 4 or 5 years. I don't know why. Please ask them that because I don't have a clue. They explain it. I never understand it. You are graded on proficiency, so you'll spit out a report at the end of the test. By the way, when you take the test, you'll know in a minute or two whether you passed or failed. So a printout will come up on the screen, a printout will come out. You may be above average in initiating, and average in closing, bullet-free, PMI does not publish any formula for the mix of proficiencies. Clearly, if you're below average in 5 areas, they're going to fail you. But I don't know what that mix of proficiencies is, nor if you fail, does the report they give you help you study. So they're very coy about that. So the best advice anyone can give you is to score high in your self-testing. That's why I recommend 85%. The last time we knew of a score, it was 61%. That was the last published score. So I'm guessing they didn't jump from 61% to 91%. I'm guessing it's somewhere in the 70 to 75% range. That's what we believe in the industry. Now, how much work experience do I need to apply? If you have a 4-year college diploma, you need 4,500 hours experience leading and directing projects. You cannot have just been a team member. You have to be able to say, I led the project, I created the work breakdown structure, I created the budget, I managed the team, I brought people onto the team, I developed them, I reported to senior management. That's a project manager. If you don't have that, we'll talk about Plan B. You also need 35 contact hours of education, either from a previous provider or from your PMP prep. If you have a high school diploma, you need 7,500 of hours experience leading and directing, also 35 contact hours of education. None of the project experience can go back more than 8 years. Education is unlimited in time. I'm going to point out the PMP handbook to you later for some other fine granular detail about it. All of the above is subject to a random computer-generated audit. You never know when it's coming. They will automatically pluck out some number, and every class I have, don't forget I teach usually about 25 people at a time. Every class I have, 1 or 2 people are audited. So my advice, assume you're going to be audited. Get your ducks in a row. Go to your manager and say, I'm taking the PMP test. He says, okay. You say, I'm getting my stuff together beforehand. Get a hold of your college diploma, ideally electronically. At the end of the class, get your 35 hours of certificate from the class. Go to your bosses and say, these are the projects I'm reporting on, and if I get audited, you, Mr. Manager or managers, may need to sign an affidavit saying that I did these. Now, I just want to say one thing. For those of you whose companies have gone out of business and you can't find a manager, I tried asking that question to PMI very recently, and they basically said something like, all people must submit correct information about their projects that must be verifiable. So good luck with that one. Somehow everybody gets through this. My best recommendation there is to call PMI because I don't really know what that answer is. Now, the application process. Many people find it daunting, and it is hard. This is because you have to think back over 8 years of your career and break your PM experience down to hours spent in the following areas. How many initiating, how many planning, how many executing, how many monitoring controlling, how many closing. Now, it doesn't have to be exact. It's your best guess. But you just have to think about your projects in a way you've never thought about them before. That's what's daunting about them. First, the fact that you've got to think about them. Second, you've got to break them down and how many hours you spent. Third, you've got to come up with a project description for each one, date, etc. You know, really think about your projects and really record that as honestly as you can, and have a manager or managers that will back that up. So it's tedious. The good news about it, it's online. You can start the application. You can fill in your name, browse around, put a few things in, save it, come back, save it, come back, save it, come back. I think it will expire if you don't touch it in 90 days, but once you start your application, you want to keep going. You can't submit the application prior to finishing your education. Let's say you go to a class, and that class lasts for 3 days. Your application is already filled out. As soon as the instructor hands you your 35 hours of contact experience certificate, you can then fill out your application and finish it. So you can't really finish it. You can't put educational experience in the future, is what I'm trying to say. Now, where do I take the exam? PMI does not now, never has administered the test. PMI writes the test. They don't teach it, and they don't administer it. They leave that to others. But unlike the fact that there are a plethora of vendors that are teaching it, there's only one place you can take the test. It's called Prometric. Prometric is a center that administers tests of all kinds, GMATs and whatnot. They're used to this. It's a computer-based test. If you go to their website and look, you can look up a testing center near you. I think you can put it in by zip code, and it'll bring up a list. There are a few places in the world, I think, where they may not be close by. You may have to take a written test, but they're all over the world otherwise. I've taught people in Belgium. They took it in Brussels. So what happens is After you finish applying to PMI, now you apply to PMI, you put in your application, that goes through to them. They may go back and forth with you to clarify a few issues. Once those issues are clarified, they will then say you're approved. Once you're approved, you then pay. Okay? Once you pay, one of two things will happen. They will send you a code or a number or hieroglyphics or whatever it might be that enables you to apply at Prometric or to schedule at Prometric. Or after you pay, they will audit you. So the audit, if everything is in place, the audit will slow you down rather than cause you to stop entirely. So let's say you don't get audited. They email you this code. You then go to Prometric and you schedule a test, enter the code the PMI gave you because it's all linked together, and then you're able to schedule the test. Now, I'll say the Prometric Center can be found here. I'm going to leave this up on the screen for now because you can't print this, but you can write this down, prometric.com. Let me say this about Prometric, several things. One is that, I think I mentioned this earlier, but if not, I'll repeat it. You can't bring anything into the test site with your Prometric. No pencils, no pens, no paper, no calculator, no smartphone. You have to memorize all your formulas. They will give you paper. They will give you a pencil or pen. They will give you a calculator. When you have 15 minutes before the exam of Prometric, during which you can take a tutorial. The tutorial teaches you how to use the computer. During that 15 minutes, you might want to spend a couple of minutes getting used to using the computer and use the rest of the 15 minutes to do a brain dump of all your formulas. Now, a good instructor will tell you what formulas to memorize, but there's a couple of pages of them, so it's not insignificant. And that's how Prometric works. I recommend to you, too, before you schedule your test, do this. Go to prometric.com, find a center near you, or a couple of them. Well before your test, get there. Drive, take a train, take a bus, walk, however you get there. Find out how long it takes to get you there under various circumstances, heavy traffic, etc. Where will you park? The reason is the last thing you want to do is panic on the day of your test. You don't want to go for a 9 o'clock in the morning test and be circling around looking for parking at 5 minutes to 9. Now, I don't know if they will hold the test up for you. I'm not sure about that. But just get there early. Visit beforehand, get there early that day, and go in. Now, how do I keep my certification once I passed? Firstly, you never take the exam again, ever. I took mine 10 years ago, 11 years ago, never took it again. You keep the certification by acquiring 60 professional development units every 3 years. How do you get them? And this is all in the PMI handbook. Doing your job, reading a project management book, which is an honor system, teaching, volunteering for PMI. I might even get some for doing this. Writing articles, taking classes, attending PMI chapter meetings, attending webinars that give out PDUs, things like this. They're not real hard to get. You do have to think about it. But they're looking for a broad range of you keeping up in your profession. You see, look at those things. If you're doing your job, you're keeping up. Reading a PM book, say you read about Agile. Teaching like I do. Volunteering for PMI I did for 2 years. You might write an article or a blog. Taking classes is very popular. Go to the chapter meeting. Stay involved. That's what PMI wants you to do at a high level. So you get the 60 PDUs. You have to pay them $50, $60. You go online, and they resend you your materials, logo, a letter, the whole bit. Now, some of you may have heard that PMI, this is almost notorious, back when 8/31/2011 changed the exam. Yes, they did. Why did they do that? PMI did what we call a role delineation study. They surveyed worldwide project managers and said, how do you do your job? What does it take to do your job? What they found, among other things, by the way, no changes to the PMBOK at all, just a test. A major change was that instead of treating professional responsibility as a separate domain, they now ask us questions as part of the other 5 domains. What is professional responsibility? Basically ethics, cultural issues, ethics in different cultures. A perfect example on the old test was you are in a foreign country and you've been asked to pay a fee to do your work. Is that fee a bribe? As that fee feels like a bribe, what do you do next? Give you 4 answers. What they do now is they've sort of moved those questions up into the other 5 domains, a domain being initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing. So there's a recognition that these ethics questions don't float freely apart from your job, but in fact they are part of your day-to-day job. So that's the major change. There's also been some talk among candidates that the test has gotten harder. That's kind of hard to qualify because those candidates aren't taking the test twice. We're just seeing maybe a little bit higher rate of failure. People are getting it sometimes their second time around. I think the questions have gotten even more situational. I can't quantify the harder. I can't see the exam, nor can any vendor see the exam. We can only go by what we hear. Now, there is some information about the exam in a PMI document called the PMI Examination Content Outline. That is not a substitute for study. It isn't anything comprehensive. You can see the URL here, so I would urge you to write it down, because if you go to PMI.org and you go to the search bar, you would think this would crop right up when you typed it in, but it doesn't. PMI buries these documents. That's why I put the URL here. So get the PMI Examination Content Outline, and it will specifically detail things like what they call cross-cutting skills. And very simply, cross-cutting skills are, if you have all these domains, where does professional responsibility lie? Where do cultural things lie? You know, these cross-cutting skills may be across all 5 domains. That's the idea of that. So it goes into some detail about that. In no way, shape, or form is a substitute for a good teacher, and the materials is just an addendum to same. And any good vendor has already incorporated this. So it's something you may just want to have as an adjunct to that. Now, what if I don't have enough hours to get the PMP? Good question. PMI is a certification called the Certified Associate in Project Management. I've taught a couple of people on this. And you can use PMP classes for it, by the way. PMP classes are probably overkill, but they won't hurt you. The CAPM is based entirely on the PMBOK, unlike the PMP, which has some non-PMBOK items like professional responsibility and cultural issues and management theories. In the CAPM, you only need a high school diploma, and you can qualify by either having 1,500 hours of experience as a team member, not a leader, or 23 contact hours of formal PM in education. So the bar is somewhat lower. Note, the CAPM is nowhere near as well known, and by well known I mean the general populace, but especially hiring managers. If you're thinking about being marketable, then you're thinking of a hiring manager, right? Who hires you? HR and the hiring managers. So they may or may not know about the CAPM, but they sure know the PMP. So you have a decision to make here. Do I go for anything at all? You might want to talk to your manager about that. Well, I can't qualify for the PMP, but maybe they'll pay for the CAPM as a way of you proving your investment. Now, the problem with the CAPM, there's no such thing as PDUs for this. You retake the CAPM every 5 years. So, and the prices are all in the CAPM handbook. I haven't laid them out. So what I think PMI is thinking here is get your CAPM and work towards your PMP over the course of the next 5 years. So think about whether that's worthwhile for you. Now, on the exam, what mix of questions do I get? I get this every time I teach. I'll answer this the first day of class, and then people will ask me again the third day of class like they never heard me say it. But the exam is randomly computer generated. If you go in and sit down at Prometric, that exam is brought down randomly but by computer generated in some mix of questions. If you ask me, if you ask Prometric, if you had some happenstance where you can call PMI at that exact minute, not only would they not tell you, they couldn't tell you. They have no idea. So you may get a little risk in procurement. Another may get a lot of cost and time. Now, I'm not allowed as a teacher to ever ask my students what they get in the exam. I'm just not allowed to, so I don't. Now, every once in a while, a student will email me or catch up with me and say, I got a lot of risk in procurement. I'll say, fine. I don't tell my subsequent students that. It doesn't help them, because they may get something entirely different. There's no trends. If there are trends, they don't last very long. And plus, I'm not allowed to convey that. So don't assume you're going to get one knowledge area versus another. You get what you get. And in bullet 3, there may be very few math and calculation type questions, or a lot. I've had students say, I've had return students who have come from other classes or studying with me, and they say, I got 2 math questions, or I got 10 math questions. You know, it's whatever. It's the luck of the draw. So prepare equally across the board. Now, are there other certifications? By this, I mean non-PMI. Yes, there are. The only caveat is that they are not as well known. That should say not, this is now. Not as well known. However, the proponents claim that they are more rigorous. There may be others, but 2 come to mind. One is the International Project Management Association, which you can look up. I don't know any of the people involved. At a cursory glance, their information looks good and fairly rigorous and probably longer term of study and more in depth. You will probably come out of one of these, of that particular one, with a more well-rounded world. However, I come back to this. You might be a better project manager from it, but will you get hired from it? Will the hiring manager recognize that? I don't know. You can do some research before you go for it. Likewise, Prince 2. Prince 2 is actually a methodology. And it's UK based and is very popular there. And I know at least one school in the States, Boston University, that teaches it. Again, not really well known outside of the project manager community, but you may find some reason to invest in that. Now, who is the best vendor? I mentioned to you that there are a variety of vendors. Is there a best vendor? I don't know. Now, I use VelociTeach and Andy Crow. Why do I use that? I like their materials. I'm not pushing it here. I'm just telling you the truth. I like the materials. I have a good relationship with them. End of story. The price is right. But if you go to PMI meetings, you'll hear people mention vendors such as Rita Mulcahy, who's very good. Rita Mulcahy has had a large part of the market and mind share for a long time. So she has good materials. Andy Crow is an up-and-comer, relatively speaking. He's been around a number of years. Now, you have to do some more research on this. There are others in the market. So here's my problem. Refrain from thinking that you will fail if you don't use some perceived market leader. I will fail if I don't use Crow. I will fail if I don't use Mulcahy. Not true. If you find another vendor, self-study or otherwise, that you like and that seems to cover the information and seems to have a good track record, then go with them. But don't take that, and if you fail, say, I should have gone with Mulcahy, I should have gone with Crow. I'm hard-pressed to say that either of those vendors has something that the other vendors don't have, unless they have better instructors. So there's that. Now, what version of the PMBOK should I study? The only version you should worry about now is PMBOK 4, the Project Management Body of Knowledge, for all of 2012. Now, at the end of 2012, PMI is scheduled to release PMBOK 5. I've already seen an advanced copy of that. It's not out. It was on their website for a while in what they call an exposure draft, and it's now gone. There are some differences. I won't go into them here. That's a different talk. Now, PMI is scheduled to release this at the end of 2012. It takes them 6 months from that to put out a new test. So by mid-2013, we should see a new PMP test. And vendors should be rewriting their material in early 2013. So the answer is clear. For 2012, pretend PMBOK 5 doesn't exist. If you get into 2013, ask PMI, ask the vendors, get a feel for that. And there'll be some transition period. If you call them in January or February, the vendor probably say, you're still good to go on last year's test. And at some point that will cross over. And what will happen, quite frankly, there's a panic. For some reason, every time the PMBOK changes, there's a panic by people to get the test before it changes to the new exam. I'm not quite sure why, but there is. So you find that the Prometric centers get more filled up. Now, does PMI have other certifications? Yes, they do. They have Agile, which is up and coming, project management methodology, a scheduling one, a risk one, and a program management one. I have none of these. They don't suit me. I don't need these to teach or do my job. But I'm not saying that you might not want them. So currently, none of these are as well known or as established as the PMP out there in the world. I think PMI has to do a better job of socializing these. Now, I can see the Agile one having some value. All of these really have some value, but Agile is the one I hear about the most. Program Manager, I know one person going for it and a woman who has it, and it's very difficult, and you need 12 people who can attest to the fact that you can do your job. So the PMP has no peer review. Program Manager leaps to 12 people giving you peer review. Is that worth it? I don't know. Think about what you're going to get out of it. Think of all the things we talked about with the PMP. Factor that in. If you start seeing these show up in Monster and Dice jobs, you'll know that somebody's valuing them. Now, where can I get more information? I've told you a lot of what you need to know, but I want you to write these URLs down. If you're serious about certification, you should download the PMP handbook from PMI. It's available at the following URL. I'm sorry it's broken there, but that's about the best I could do to get it in there. Pull that down. It's 30 to 40 pages long. It tells you a lot of what I said, but I didn't go into things like all the retake information and cancellation fees and everything about applications. It's just too much. So I'd rather you download it, read it, and if you have questions, call PMI. Likewise, the CAPM handbook is available in the certification area. Download that if that interests you. Read that. One or the other. You're not going for both, right? I've given you enough already, I think, to tell you which one you can likely go for. So pick one. One you're going to go for. Download that, read that. Call PMI. If you want to contact me, you can. There's more information about contacting me shortly. But I think your best bet, quite frankly, for the tough questions is PMI first, me or another vendor second. That's it, folks. That's in a nutshell what you need to think about for certification. I try to give you the truth as I know it from 10 years of teaching about what this thing is and what it isn't. So you can contact me if you'd like. You can email me. If you email me, we can talk by phone. I don't charge people for just talking, right? So we can talk whatever you want to do. You can find me on LinkedIn that gives you my history. My website gives you more of the, I'm not sure, they overlap a little bit. And I've recently started a blog, and I call it the Useful Project Manager. And I try to give up useful tips about once a week. In fact, I'm currently in the middle of just this very topic. So you'll see the same topic repeated up there. But I've also had stuff on PMBOK 4 to 5 changes. I'm working with some colleagues to do guest blogging about a variety of topics, just things of interest that I think are useful for a project manager to use. So anyway, that's everything I can tell you about the PMP. And if you want to contact me, feel free. Otherwise, we'll see you down the road.